So today's we're probably not going to go the whole hog again. There's another recommended screening for you. So if you want to use, we'll probably just go for an hour today. So if you want to use the second hour to take in that screening, it's a documentary. It's a few years old now. About FIFA, but it's kind of very related and relevant to what we're going to talk about today, which is the kind of governance of sports governing bodies. So it's just an interesting look into what were some of the issues that were going on with FIFA at the time and how the governance issues seep into sports governing bodies, particularly international sports governing bodies. So the focus of today's lecture is on non-profit organisations, and with a particular focus on the role and function of the board. So we've got 4 learning outcomes. We want to look at what is a non-profit organisation and how is it different from a for-profit organisation. We're going to look at what the role and function of the board is within that organisation. We're going to look at how the boards of non-profits should be composed and who should sit on them, what are the kind of key roles. And how can we use tools and frameworks, or what kind of advice and structure is out there to try and hold boards accountable or to encourage better practice and better governance within sports governing bodies. So why does all of this matter? We've kind of spoken about this in previous lectures. These are some quite dated statistics. So if you did want to think about using statistics within your assignments when they arise later in the semester, I would think about perhaps using more contemporary statistics, but these are a few years old now. So we can see that both at an economic and social level, sport's hugely valuable to the UK. So we've got some numbers that as many as 27 million people participate in sports activities in the UK annually. Obviously now that's going to be different. It's probably likely to be more given the growth in population, but worth kind of clarifying that when you do some research of your own. Furthermore, huge amount of people go and watch sport live over the age of 15. I think there's some statistic that Scotland's the Scottish football is one of the most highly watched leagues in the world in terms of population. So per capita, the percentage of the population that go and watch live football. We've got huge contribution of economic wealth to the central government. So sports contributes about 5.5 billion. So central government, and over 2 billion of the central government national lottery money is reinvested back into sports. So there's a lot of scrutiny, basically. Sport's got a huge kind of cultural, social, economic value to us. There's some statistics that I haven't included here around the value of sport and physical activity to the NHS the other day. So this was quite new research. It was about £9.9 billion that sports contributes to the NHS in terms of the savings that they make in terms of health, well-being, and added benefits in that sense. So hugely important to us. And therefore, it's actually really important about how we look at how these sports are governed. Again, as we looked at in the first lecture I did with you guys, we looked at what is governance, or how could we consider governance, and we can really look at it as being that process of decision making and the process by which decisions are implemented or not implemented, and how organizations are directed, controlled, and regulated. So it's a key foundation for the success of any organization in any sector, whether that be commercial or non-profit. And you don't have to look too far with examples like perhaps Sports Direct, where there's been failings in corporate governance in a business setting with a sports organization, to see that governance affects both non-profits and for-profit organizations. We've got good governance as being about having the right structure, people and policies and procedures in your place at your club, and we'll look at what is perhaps the framework we can look at, what are the individual pillars that we can look at in terms of good governance later on. And actually, what can good governance help you do? You shouldn't really just see it as a box ticking, but actually having good governance in terms of your organization is really about securing your club's future or your organization's future, thinking ahead to what are the challenges, what are the risks that are going to come, what are the issues that are going to arise in the future. Something like COVID, no one really predicted happening, but how can governance help mitigate some of those the risks that came up and threatened the livelihoods of a lot of clubs and sports organizations when it came around the corner. Can secure your club's reputation. You really want to avoid having kind of a governance related scandal, because once your reputation is damaged in some way, very, very hard to get it back. Governance can help kind of protect that reputation and avoid some of those issues. And it can assist you in meeting requirements for funding as well. So once you've applied for a bit of funding, If it's a sports governing body or a national governing body, you're likely to be receiving money from UK Sport or Sport Scotland or National Lottery. You might need governance A to get that money, and B, governance is going to help you report on it. So how is that money being spent? What is the impact of that? This all relates to governance and decision making. So why is it particularly important to non-profits? There's a quote here from the chair of Sport England, Richard Lewis. So he's saying basically, as Sport England are getting public money, so taxpayers' money, their aim as investors of public funds is to invest in organisations that are well governed and managed, as they will be in a stronger position to deliver our sporting outcomes. So they want to give money to organisations that are well governed. Why wouldn't they want to give money to organisations that aren't well governed? Any thoughts? Sorry? Exactly. Yep. There's perhaps no transparency around how that money's being spent. There's lack of records as to what that money was spent on. There's no clear outcomes. They've perhaps applied for funding but not had a clear idea of how they're going to spend it. So Sport England are saying, actually, governance is really important. We only really want to give money to organisations that are well governed. And in terms of this kind of funding bit, it's really important for building that credibility with funders, staff, volunteers, potentially members of the media as well. So media will look at your organisation, and there's quite a few scandals that perhaps have hit the headlines in the last few years with, perhaps you could tell me some of the sports organisations, governing bodies that have perhaps had issues with governance over the last 5-10 years. Anything that you can think of? Any ideas or examples you could offer?
Governance provides for investment for means.
Yep.
For any service.
Yep.
As not-for-profit political provide the teams or any members join or attend the.
Yep. Okay. All right. Good. Any particular examples we can think of organisations that have perhaps had governance issues where their reputation has been damaged?
FIFA.
Sorry? FIFA, great. Yep. Really good example. What have some of the issues been there?
Bribery.
Yep, bribery. Yep, corruption. Okay. Yep. Anything else? Anyone familiar with the Cricket Scotland issues in the last couple of years? No. Okay. So we'll look at that later on. Real issues in terms of institutional racism, which is an issue that related to governance. British cycling. Does anyone remember there was this thing around the kind of culture of bullying within the teams, within the athletes? And there's also gymnastics as well that has also had these kind of allegations that have come out around the kind of cultures that have been allowed to be created. And okay, some of that might be related to staffing, but a lot of that comes from governance and governance overseeing the management as well. So really important to maintain your reputation as an organisation, and funders will certainly think twice about giving funding to an organisation that perhaps has had some reputational damage. So funders like to know how any monies which are given to them will be well used, and it's really important to secure and maintain a reputation and harder to build it up. So this is why governance is really important. So one of our learning outcomes was to look at what is a non-profit and how is it different from a for-profit. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it's an organisation that is set up that doesn't generate a profit per se, and that their activities have a social benefit rather than a financial benefit. But that's not to say that finance isn't important to non-profits. Okay, so non-profit organizations still need to be sustainable. They still need to operate in budget. They still need to try and generate a surplus. And that's often what we call it. So FIFA is technically a non-profit. It's the governing body. It's the International Sports Federation or governing body for football. But they generated a surplus of 1.8 billion as of the year 2020. So when we're talking about non-profits, we don't talk about this necessarily as being profit, because that money isn't being distributed to any shareholders, it's being reinvested back into FIFA's activities in theory. Although we've discussed some of perhaps the issues of FIFA. So non-profits can generate surplus. It's just the difference is that money is then put back into their activities rather than to shareholders. So we've got, particularly with the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Hong Kong, a lot of kind of Commonwealth-based countries. We've got sports, club-based sporting systems. Almost all the sports teams and competitors are organised by non-profit sports organisations. So they're very much focused on being run by volunteers often, rather than kind of for-profit structures where lots of people are being paid to be involved in how they're run. And we can look at the kind of sporting landscape and this non-profit sporting landscape in many different forms. So actually, let's just hear some examples from you of different types of non-profits. We know, okay, we've got our likes of FIFA. We've just spoken about them. Who else would we have, do you think? Name some other varying sized non-profit sports organizations.
ICC.
ICC, yeah, go on. What's that?
International Cricket.
Yep. Yeah, Council, International Cricket Council, so the sports governing body for cricket. So we've got a big world governing body there, okay? What else have we got? What other non-profit sports organizations do we have?
AC.
Sorry?
AC.
ACE?
EC. Asian United Corporation.
Okay, yep. So ACE, is that right? Yeah, okay, great. What else do we have? So we've got our ICC and FIFAs. We've got our sports governing bodies. What would be a step down from that? These big global sports governing bodies, what would be the next stage down? Who are their members? Excellent. So you've got British Swimming, who are a national governing body. So they're overseeing swimming in Scotland, right? So we've got international sports federations, we've got national governing bodies. And what would be a step down from that? Regional, yeah. Or who said that, sorry? Yeah, regional or even smaller perhaps? Yeah, or even just clubs, right? So you've got lots of, so actually I can see you're wearing a Clyde jacket. Clyde are technically a professional football club, but they are a non-profit. So they operate in a way in which they reinvest their money back into the organisation. So we can look at clubs, a lot of sort of voluntary clubs. So if we're looking at the example here in Scotland, we could take Dunblane Soccer Club down the road. Okay, so they're a non-profit. They don't have shareholders. They don't have dividends. They're putting all the money back into providing a service, providing an activity for young people in the area, which is to reduce barriers for them to be able to play football. So we've got small local clubs that may field a few teams and local football competitions. Somebody mentioned regional associations that coordinate competitions, and perhaps even state-led organizations. So these are kind of some of the smaller non-profit organizations we might have. If we go up a tier, if we take this kind of national governing body for football, we've got the Scottish FA, so we've got national sports organisations. They're perhaps regulating the rules within those countries, and they're perhaps taking into account all the different stakeholders they've got. They are, in theory, a non-profit organisation reinvesting their money back into their objectives, which is the development of football within the country. And then we've got our kind of international sports federations. So we've got FIFA. So you can see that kind of scale, but the way it's set up, often all of these organizations are non-profit organizations. So what have these organizations all got in common? Okay, we're looking at, they've got different scale, they've got different size in terms of their turnover, in terms of the number of people who work for them, in terms of the types of organizations they're running. We just saw the numbers associated to FIFA there. Do you think that Dunblane Soccer Club have got that kind of turnover? So we're looking at actually what is it that binds all of these organizations together? Well, they're very much focused on their activities rather than generating a profit. So they're very much about their activities, which are often deemed to be charitable in some way. So if we take the example of football, reducing barriers to participating in football is often considered to be a charitable objective that all of those organizations have in common. So it's all about that kind of reduction of barriers, developing the sport in that country. They're also interdependent as well, so they all rely on each other. We can all look at the way in which somebody might start off at a grassroots football club, perhaps progress to the national team, end up playing at the Olympics or a similar type of competition. Okay. Often volunteer-led as well. So a lot of people on the boards of organizations aren't paid for their time. They're all kind of volunteer-run. And they're doing it because of their love of the sport. And then we need to just have a look at the practice. Okay, so the people that are involved in the governance of these organizations are perhaps volunteers, that they are managed by staff and they employ people on a salary that are running the organizations. So what I would like you to do, hopefully this works, is to scan this QR code, and I want you to have a think about these 9 areas, and I want you to think about what are the differences between a for-profit organization. So let's take Sports Direct or Nike or Adidas, and think about how that is different from some of those non-profit organizations in terms of funding, staff, ownership, purpose, structure, taxes, culture, accountability, and leadership. So just pick 1 or 2 of those, and perhaps just highlight which of the 9 you've put on your Padlet, so you stick it on a note, and outline how they're different. Does that make sense? Hopefully the QR code works. Try it as well. So we've got these 9 areas: funding, staff, ownership, purpose, structure, taxes, culture, accountability, and leadership. So how a for-profit and not-for-profit organization is different in one of these 9 areas. If you want to be bold and tackle something like taxes, even if it's just a guess, please feel free to. And by that, I mean, how are they treated by the government? Do they have to pay taxes on certain things that perhaps a business would have to pay? Okay, give you a couple more minutes. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these. So we've got focus of the organization is not financial, but on building sport. Yep. Funding, so for profit organizations, ticket sales, TV license merchants, shareholder investments. Okay, good. For non-profit organizations, much more based around government investment or Sport Scotland investment or the equivalent in whichever country. Where is that perhaps not true? So largely accurate. What might some of the exceptions to that be? Which non-profits generate huge amount of money from sort of broadcasting rights? So right now, if you took the Rugby World Cup being organised by the international governing body for rugby, they'll be generating revenue from the TV rights to that. So they are technically a non-profit, but they can still generate income from TV and ticket sales, of course. But yes, shareholder investments, absolutely. Purpose for profits, primary intention to generate revenue and economic growth. For non-profits, yep, absolutely to generate interest and participation. Good one here on staffing. Non-profit organizations would have volunteer staff, unlike profit organizations. Yep. Why do you think people are more likely to volunteer for non-profits? Yep.
To get experience.
Yep, good. Okay. Easier to get into. More people are looking for help. Yep. Perhaps people are more motivated to want to help a non-profit than perhaps help a for-profit organization get richer. Okay, profit versus non-profit. Profit companies seek to provide a service. Yep, good. Cultural staff. Profit organizations could have a culture around money. Yes, employ people who are knowledgeable about making money rather than the sport itself. Yep, absolutely. Taxes. For-profit have to pay taxes on any profits generated from their activities. Excellent. Non-profits can label profits as a surplus and put those funds back into the organization. That's brilliant. Well done. You also get tax exemptions as well. So, yep, so corporation tax, non-profits won't be expected to pay corporation tax. Great. Funding, significantly more finances flowing in than a non-profit. Yep. Purpose, focus on facilitating sport and staff. Excellent. Great. Okay, good. Thank you for that. So if we now think about, we know what the difference is between a not-for-profit organization and a for-profit organization, we're now going to look at what is the role and function of the board. Okay, so we've got this difference between the governance, so the board of the organization, and the management. What do we think is the difference, really? What's the difference between governance and management? Great. So who would be looking at it on a smaller level? Yeah, great. So we've got our governance, which in theory is our board of directors or trustees, whatever you want to call them. And that might change depending on the legal type of the organization, whether it's a charity or registered as something else. Versus they're looking at broader issues. Okay, so they're thinking about long term, they're thinking about strategy, they're thinking about mitigating risk, and they're thinking about growth, right? And then exactly as we've had there, we've got the management that are perhaps dealing with day-to-day operation, the issues that might arise on a day-by-day basis. Okay, so there's a clear delineation between the board and the management. Okay, so the management are likely to be paid staff that are there every day, opening up, taking on some of these challenges, and the board that are setting the strategy and kind of encouraging the staff or holding the staff accountable. So the role of the board to further the organization's overall purpose are set out in its governing document, and that might be around just broadening participation to sport and also setting out its direction and strategy. We've got making sure the work of the charity or the non-profit is effective, responsible, and also compliant. So we're making sure that what we're doing as an organization stays within the framework of the law. We're making sure safeguarding is really important as well. So we're safeguarding not only people, but we're also making sure that money is well spent and used wisely, making sure that resources and property are being used wisely. We're maximizing the potential from the resources and assets that we have so we can put these back into our purpose, so we can have the greatest purpose that we can have as an organization. We're being accountable to those with an interest or stake or who regulate the organization. So perhaps if you're a charity, you might report into someone like Oscar, or perhaps if you're a sports governing body, you might be have to report into Sports Scotland in some way. Okay, so whoever it is that is above you. And being clear about the people who carry out the work for the charity as well. So making sure that there's kind of a supporting environment where staff feel supported and encouraged, but you're also holding them accountable as well. So if we have a think about an organization's vision and mission, this is something that the board is responsible for setting. Okay, so this might change on a couple of years. Lots of organizations will have 4, 5, 6 year plans that they're looking to implement. And this will be really tied into what is the vision, what is the mission, what is it that we as an organization are setting out to achieve. And the board is really kind of the driving force behind that. And they create these strategic plans which are supposed to align really closely with the vision and mission. So ensuring the organization has a mission, vision, and a set of values which the board members agree on and share, and kind of creating this vision statement is really important for the kind of purpose that you want to pursue. So an organization's vision statement should brand the club's purpose, and we can look at some of these examples in a minute, offer clarity to potential members and partnering organizations, help the organization set goals and priorities, guide members and leaders in making decisions about service and fundraising activity. And we've got a difference here between what is our vision and which is our mission, which is quite easy to confuse, and I am quite guilty of it as well. So where your vision is looking towards the future, your mission is more practical and doesn't often change over time. So we can have a look here at some examples. Mission statement. So we've got Scottish Sports Futures. Has anyone come across Scottish Sports Futures? Yep, great. Okay, so their mission statement, use the power of sport to inspire young people to make positive lifestyle choices. Yep. Everyone can swim, Scottish Swimming. So this is something that they want to set out to achieve. This is their mission. They want everybody to be able to swim. Confident, healthy and aspiring community in Drumchapel Community Sports Hub. Be the first choice sport for girls and women, Netball Scotland. Life skills through sport in a safe, fun, respectful environment, Dunbar Community Sports Hub. And a happier, healthier Scotland where physical activity improves quality of life and well-being for all. A couple more. Building a better Blantyre, one person at a time, Blantyre Soccer Academy. Be the best all-encompassing hockey club in central Scotland with a reputation for being one of the most well-run community clubs in the area. Have a world-class club serving the local community and providing opportunities to enrich people's lives. What is kind of common about all of those mission statements? What are some of the things that you can take away from them? What are they all focused on doing?
So positive and encouraging.
All positive and encouraging. Yep, great.
The improvement of the life of the community, etc.
Great. So they're all about trying to improve people's lives, not often actually about creating great sports people, right? It's often actually about creating better people or producing or creating a better environment. So you can see healthy and aspiring community, using the power of sports. It's really about how they're going to use their sports to create better human beings and people. Now, they're quite different from some of the for-profit organization mission statements, you'll say, now none of the for-profit organization statements are going to say we want to make as much money as we can, but they're very different in terms of the nature. They're not necessarily about having that human element or that social element to them. So how do the kind of board and the structures of for-profit organizations differ from non-profit organizations? So if we take a football club, for example, we've got our board, we'll have our chairperson, I should say chairperson, not chairman, and then we've got our directors that sit underneath that individual. We've got our chief executive officer. So what the delineation here is, this is the governance, and then this is the management. Okay, so we've got our board of directors and our chairperson, and then everything below it is management. Now, in theory, this board should oversee all of the management and the organisation of the club. If we compare that with the structure of a not-for-profit football club, might not necessarily have a board, might be called a committee. Again, we've got our governance structure in this dotted line out here, and then our kind of day-to-day operation and management of the club here. But we've got our president, we've got our secretary, we've got our vice president, we've got our treasurer, then we might have ordinary committee members that take up general roles within the board of the club. So kind of a different structure. What is often, how are boards made up and how are they composed differently between for-profits and not-for-profits? Often. How many of you are members of sports clubs? Okay. Do you guys have annual general meetings that you're expected to attend? Okay. What happens at the annual general meeting? Or did you not go to them?
So if you're a member, you get a choice to go whether or not you're part of the committee.
Okay. Yep. And what happens at the meetings?
Discuss any issues and being re-elected into positions. So someone wants to step down from position, someone else wants to step in. And issues of the club.
Good. Okay. So you mentioned there about re-election. So we've got an election process, right? So if somebody wants to step down, in theory, there would be an election process where perhaps the members would vote for whoever was going to sit on the board of that organization, right? For profit organizations, doesn't really work democratically a lot of the time. It might do, but often they will just be nominated, or just somebody will choose or ask them to be a director or serve in that governance structure. Okay, so there's a difference there between a lot of members of governance structures are elected. They have to stand at an annual general meeting. They need to present themselves to the members, and the members will then vote on who they think is a suitable person to stand in that organization. That's very different from for-profit organizations often. So who are some of the key roles? We've spoken about that board structure or that committee structure. What are the kind of main roles we would expect to see in a not-for-profit organization? Chairperson, great. Secretary, yep. And treasurer, excellent. And maybe a fourth person? Some have it, some don't. Trustees, would have our trustees, yep. Any named position? No. So we'd have our chairperson, we've got a treasurer, we've got a secretary, and we might have a deputy chairperson as well, or a vice chair. Okay. That obviously should have come in first. I don't know why that didn't work. So we've got our role of the chair. Let's start with the chair. Chairperson, pivotal role within the organization, ultimately responsible for its effective leadership. Their role to provide leadership. They lead the meetings themselves. They manage effectively, hopefully. They listen to the members and they engage with the members. They try to understand what's going on within the organization. And they're trying to ensure equal opportunity as well. So they're sort of managing the meetings. They're making sure that everyone has an opportunity to get their point of view across. They're making sure perhaps one or two individuals don't dictate the way a meeting is run. And they're also, in theory, able to accept positive feedback. Okay, so a good chairperson makes sure that they lead the organization forward. They're setting the strategy. They're involved in just providing that kind of figurehead for the organization as well. And yeah, these are good qualities of a chair as well. Quite hard to find somebody that will be able to do all of those things. That's why they're quite rare to find a good chairperson. Duties of a secretary, we've got the secretary, they're there to really assist the chair in making sure that the running of that organization is as smooth as possible. So often the medium between the connection between internal organization itself and its stakeholders, often the members, so perhaps a contact point. Their kind of roles are to help organize those board meetings, to make sure that there's suitable governance structure, that you're having kind of board meetings every month or every couple of months. They're then making sure that the paperwork for that meeting is sent out in time. They're filing the reports, they're keeping the minutes. They're making sure that these get lodged if they need to be lodged with a governing body or a regulator in some way. And they're just making sure that the organization is sticking to its governing documents. So we might have a constitution or articles of association. The secretary is really to make sure that when in the operation of that organization, that they are doing things by the constitution. And then we've got the role of the treasurer, pretty self-explanatory in this. They manage the money. So they're making sure that the organization has enough money to meet its obligations, whether they need to pay for pitch hire for the next couple of months. They've got to keep an eye on making sure that they've got enough reserves, a suitable amount of surplus that they can generate each year. So their kind of duties will include making sure that bills are paid on time, making sure they're getting the money in if they're due money from certain people, keeping financial records that are accurate, that they can share with the board, maintaining the accounts. They've got to make sure that they're compliant with any kind of legal or financial duties. So this might include perhaps the organization has staff and you've got to pay tax in terms of employment tax. They'll be making sure that those are paid. Reporting to the board, so sharing financial reports at those board meetings and perhaps giving an overview of where the organization sits. Are they on schedule for their budget? Are they behind schedule? Are they ahead of schedule with their budget? And assisting with fundraising and financial planning as well. Do any of you fulfill any of those three roles in some of the clubs you're a part of? Yeah? What do you do? President. Okay. Which club? Oh, nice. Okay. How do you find it? Yeah, very time consuming. How many hours would you say you give up a month? 10 a week, right? Okay. So yeah, quite an intensive role. And did you identify with some of the stuff you saw there in terms of being that figurehead? Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So some of the things that we'll talk about here are perhaps what are some of the issues in terms of governance, or where do issues arise. So we've looked at what it would look like in this nice rosy picture where everything works well. We've got our chairperson leading effectively. We've got our secretary making sure we're compliant. We've got a great treasurer who's making sure that we're on top of our finances. But what are some of the issues that arise in terms of the governance of these organizations? So we've got a real array of different pressures that sports governing bodies or non-profit sports organizations face in terms of a huge range of different issues, really. So we've got the requirement for increased revenue generation, perhaps even more important given the issues we've had with COVID and now a cost of living crisis. So pitch hire. I'm involved in a club where the pitch hire has gone up significantly since the time we started the club. So with some of the pressures there are perhaps going to the members and saying, look, really sorry, we're going to have to increase your fees, which is also tough on them because they're having to pay more money for everything else in life as well. So a real challenge in that sense. We've got the issue of actually attracting higher membership numbers, and membership numbers are down since COVID in lots of sports. So we've got this issue of we need to generate more money from having more members, but generally less people are playing sport since COVID, in some sports, I should say. And the provision of more member services as well. So more people expecting more things from their club when they join. Whilst at the same time, and this is particularly true for kind of a sports governing body, they've got all of those issues trying to support their clubs, but actually they might also have the issue of balancing that with an elite level athlete or trying to produce elite level athletes to compete at the next Commonwealth Games or Olympics. So all of these things that kind of pressures on the board. And actually, if we were to kind of think about it a bit more broadly and in terms of a gradual scale, a lot of the failures in sport have been because of this evolution we've had from the kind of, we spoke last week about WADA and some of the principles around being amateur. So lots of these sports were kind of amateur sports, and they were governed fairly amateurly as well. So we've had this kind of growth into being a more professional and greater expectations in terms of how these organizations should be governed and the professionalism involved with them. But perhaps the governance hasn't actually kept up to speed with the pace of the sports industry. So we've got, as we say, the slow evolution of what were primarily voluntary institutions founded in the 19th century into professionalized bodies and regulatory systems adequate to govern the modern commercial world of sport today. But many voluntary sports have been well governed, and there are plenty of professional organizations where widespread abuses have taken place. So we've got a real range. Okay, it doesn't affect all organizations, but some might be more susceptible than others. And then the failure to have appropriate governance to control and monitor sport organizations can result in withdrawal of sponsorship, decline in membership numbers and participation. There's some recommended reading for you this week, and this table is taken from it. It's a look at kind of the past 20 years of how sports, this is with a particular focus on sports governing bodies, so our likes of FIFA, our likes of Cricket Scotland, our life of Scottish swimming, Scottish golf, etc. So thinking about that kind of level of non-profit organizations and what have kind of been the frameworks or guidance for them. So a lot of this stuff has come from the likes of UK Sport or the Sport and Recreation Alliance, or perhaps Sport Scotland. We've got Sport England here. So the paper is really looking at how have guidance and what are the expectations relating to governance, what have they looked like over the last 20 years. So this table kind of sets out since 2004 what that looks like. So there was firstly a kind of a good governance, a guide for national governing bodies, and the paper will go on to talk about the codification of governance as well. So making sure that certain organizations have to have certain things in places. So it's worth a read. It's on Canvas, and it will kind of help your understanding here. But this table kind of breaks down what the main points are. So that first paper was really looking at the governing board, individual board members, supporting the board, stakeholder engagement and compliance. Then 7 years on, we had a voluntary code for good governance for the sport and recreation sector, not necessarily specific to sports governing bodies, but perhaps non-profit organizations more broadly. And they're looking at a range of different things as well, including standards and systems, accountability and transparency. And kind of you can go ahead and look at that as well. And then then in 2012 we had a Sport England one, which was governance strategy. So this was kind of 6 key points around kind of governance. What should boards have in terms of those sports governing bodies, and what are the expectations of them? Until now, we've had this in the last couple of years, which is a new updated one. So this is what we're going to just quickly look at, which is UK Sports Code for Sports Governance. So this again is on your Canvas page for the week if you want to go and have a look at it a bit more depth. So we've got the Code for Sports Governance. It sets out the levels of transparency, diversity and inclusion, accountability and integrity that are required from those organisations that seek and on a receipt of UK government or funding from the government or national lottery, basically. So we've got 5 pillars that we can look at. We've got structure, people, communication, standards and conduct, and policies and processes. So in theory, all sports governing bodies or anyone that receives funding from the government, UK Sport, National Lottery, needs to really think about these 5 key pillars of governance. So if we look at structure, so clear and appropriate governance structure. So we looked at those kind of organizational charts. What does the governance look like in each organization? What are those different roles? Does each role have a job description or a role description? Does the person in each of those roles know what's expected of them? Okay, and that's a bit of an issue when people join a board. They're perhaps not actually sure what's required of them or what are their duties that they need to fulfill. They might get a bit of a handover, but perhaps not something as thorough as having a role description that they need to look through. So you've got, this need to have proper structure, proper detail, thought around how this all works together. Constitution as well. So we mentioned earlier about these organizations need to adhere to their constitution. So making sure that they're constituted, making sure that they're legal as well in terms of how they operate and the activities that they're undertaking, and operating effectively as well. People, and this is a big one at the moment. So organizations shall recruit and engage with people with appropriate diversity, independent skills, experience, and knowledge to take effective decisions that further the organization's goals. So they did have a requirement before around you had to have a certain percentage of your board that was made up of people from different backgrounds. And what they found was most organizations weren't adhering to that. So Again, that's on Canvas. You can have a look at the number of organizations that fail to meet a kind of a quota for diversity in terms of gender, race, and creed as well. So you've got communication. Organizations need to be transparent and accountable, engaging effectively with stakeholders and nurturing internal democracy. So making sure that being transparent with organizations, with their stakeholders, standards and conduct, uphold standards of integrity and engage in regular and effective evaluation. So once they've got that funding from sports governing body, UK Sport or National Lottery, being accountable about how it's spent, tracking the outcomes that are a part of it as well. Okay, so being monitoring and evaluating their success as well, and policies and processes as well. So making sure that they're being lawful, they're abiding by all the laws that apply to them as an organization, having responsible financial strategic planning, and having appropriate controls and risk management procedures. And I just want to end on this quick case study of Cricket Scotland. I have this issue, don't I?
Cricket teams is the same.
Very good morning. A review into Scottish cricket has found it to be institutionally racist, and with some cases now being referred to the police. The independent investigation was launched after 2 Scotland players claimed they had suffered racial abuse. The findings of the review, which have been seen by Sky News, are due to be published on Monday. Let's speak to our Scotland correspondent, James Matthews. James, this is just another blow for cricket after it's been trying to recover after the Yorkshire racism scandal.
Yeah, it's certainly a blow for Scottish cricket. The events in Scotland come in the wake of circumstances in Yorkshire, and issues of racism were raised by Majid Haq, Scotland's leading wicket taker, and Qasim Sheikh, a 27 times capped batsman. They gave interviews to Sky Sports in which they claimed abuse throughout their careers, saying that they had been treated differently from white colleagues throughout the sport. Now, this review will be published on Monday. I can tell you that we have learned it very much backs up the central claim that was originally made of institutional racism that runs through Cricket Scotland, the sports organising body. One source telling us institutional racism was the claim at the start of this, and that's very much backed up by what investigators have found. Multiple referrals have been made to a variety of organisations about alleged racist behaviour, and it's a police matter too, because one of those referrals, at least one, has been made to Police Scotland with a view to further investigations. So on Monday, the full findings will be made public. There will undoubtedly be consequences for Cricket Scotland, perhaps for their board members. Sport Scotland, the organising body of sport north of the border, has said it wants to see the recommendations enacted in full. But while we wait for those full revelations on Monday, let's speak to one of the cricketers at the centre of this affair in Scotland, Qasim Sheikh, batsman, 27 times capped for your country. Qasim, this started in Scotland with you, with yourself and Majid, going public about your experiences within cricket. Tell me about the racism that you experienced.
I think it all started obviously when Azim Rafiq spoke out south of the border, and then we were asked questions in Scotland of what we felt. And what we felt was, we were always treated differently. You just have to look at kind of the stats quite easily to compare how many minorities have played for the national team. We were lucky to make it to that point, but stumbled and didn't play after speaking out against a coach at the time. So overreaction. Magic sent a tweet 2015, sent home from the World Cup, never to play for his country again, and never played again. These type of overreactions suggest to me they were treated differently because of the colour of our skin compared to white counterparts, which I don't feel they face the same thing.
In terms of participation in cricket, we're at the Edinburgh South Club here at Edge in Edinburgh. There is huge participation among South Asians at this level, but relatively few at the top level.
We had this conversation before we went on, and I said, have a look around. This is just one small cricket club in Scotland, and 90% of the kids here are probably South Asian or minority backgrounds. It's the same across the country. So yes, why doesn't it add up? At national team level, I'm not suggesting we have quota systems or anything like that, not at all. Just wanted to see equal opportunities, and people from minorities have got a South Asian background in particular. Cricket's in the blood.
Okay, so I won't play all of it, but it's embedded in the slides, which will be on Canvas later today. So, which of those 5 pillars do you think perhaps Cricket Scotland didn't adhere to particularly well? The 5 pillars we looked at, set by UK Sport, Code for Governance. Where? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So standards and conduct. Great. What else? People. Yeah. So perhaps not having a diverse range of voices or people with different experiences to be able to contribute to the board and the decision-making processes. So yeah, both of those are absolutely true. That report that they published found that there was 31 indicators basically around racism, and Cricket Scotland failed 29 of them, and then Sport Scotland stepped in. The whole board resigned from Cricket Scotland. Sport Scotland stepped in to oversee its management, so they are recovering now as an organisation since this kind of incident. So hopefully that's been a kind of useful oversight of the role and function of boards of non-profit organisations, particularly focusing on sports governing bodies. Has anybody got any questions? Otherwise, we'll finish up early because I know that some of you have got lectures later, seminars. But great. Okay, thanks, guys.